This is U.S. Constitution Amendment number 11. And I wanted to address D. Lukens 9 for a second. He wondered why I didn't bring up any court cases with the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Well, when the Constitution was written, those amendments were immediately attached to the Constitution. So, really, there wasn't anything significant about those 10 amendments because they kind of all worked together. And so I didn't really want to mess with a bunch of court cases while I was doing that, because the amendments are kind of they're part of the Constitution. End of story. Well, when you're talking about amendment number 11 or any of the amendments thereafter, those were derived after the Constitution. And some of them actually contradict things in the Constitution. And so court cases are really important to discuss in those amendments, whereas in the first 10 they aren't really that big of a discussion. Alright, so let's go on with amendment number 11. You've got the Revolutionary War. Georgia's in bad shape. They need supplies or they're going to lose their part of the war. Well, some delegate of Georgia, I don't know whether it was a representative or a senator, I don't know who it was that was sent, but somebody who represented Georgia went to South Carolina, and that person met Captain Robert Farquhar, and if I mispronounced your name, I'm sorry. Okay? Anyway, they met with Captain Robert Farquhar, which happened to be a merchant in South Carolina. Obviously, he was a well-to-do merchant. And they said, look, we need supplies right now. We do not have an ounce of money to give you, but we need supplies or we're going to lose this war. And Captain Robert Farquhar said, hey, okay, I tell you what, let's draw up a contract. I will give you a set amount of goods, and when the war's over with, you're going to give me a set amount of money for what I give to you. I'm like, okay, that's fine. So the Georgians went over to South Carolina, picked up the supplies, brought them back to Georgia, and obviously we know that the United States won against Great Britain in the Revolutionary War. Well, when the war was over with, Captain Robert Farquhar went to Georgia and said, look, I'm not sure who I met with, but you guys owe me money, here's the contract. Well, Georgia says, hey, look, we're not going to pay you. We know you're a British loyalist, and as far as we're concerned, that's treasonous. And because of that, we're not going to pay you. Well, Captain Robert Farquhar decided to sue him in the Georgia state courts. Well, who do you think the Georgia state courts are going to side by? Well, they're going to side with the Georgian government. They're not going to side with this guy. Well, he felt that wasn't fair. Unfortunately, he also ended up dying before he could do anything else about it. Well, the guy who inherited everything that Robert Farquhar had, his name was Alexander Chisholm, and I might have mispronounced that name too, and if I did, I'm sorry. Okay? But we have Alexander Chisholm, and he inherited everything from Robert Farquhar, including the contract between Farquhar and the Georgian government. Well, this guy then decided to pursue this in the Georgia courts, and he failed. So then he decided to go to the United States Supreme Court. And the reason why he decided to go to the United States Supreme Court is because he remembered Article 3 of the Constitution, which said that the judicial branch of the United States government, in other words, the Supreme Court, had jurisdiction over matters like this when a citizen of a state sues a state. Supreme Court has that jurisdiction. Well, when the Supreme Court heard the case, they said, Georgia, you really do have to pay, because we're going to go by Article 3 of the Constitution. Well, this upset the states greatly, and a lot of them decided they needed an amendment to the Constitution to prevent this from ever happening again. So, They made U.S. Constitution Amendment number 11, which says, "The judicial power of the United States shall not be construed to extend to any suit in law or equity commenced or prosecuted against one of the United States by citizens of another state or by citizens or subjects of any foreign state." In other words, if somebody in, say, Illinois wanted to sue the government of Kentucky for some money, well, the government of Kentucky, the state government of Kentucky, their court would decide the case. The citizen of Illinois couldn't take that case to the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court wouldn't hear it due to U.S. Constitution Amendment number 11. So basically, U.S. Amendment number 11 just pretty much knocked out Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution. Now you say, well, what about if you lived in Great Britain? Let's say you lived in London, England, and you wanted to sue the state of Kentucky. Well, that would be decided in a Kentucky state court, not in the U.S. Supreme Court. That means, in essence, that if the Kentucky state court decides to side with Kentucky, there's nothing you can do about it. I don't know that that's fair, but that's the way it works. In other words, if the state court says that that state does not owe you any money, you're just out. Alright. I will tell you more in a future video. Stay tuned.